make a presentation that will be as to torture and killing of prisoners in Donbass. And we'll have Amnesty International in Ukraine and Denis Krassimir, who's the Deputy Director on Amnesty International in Europe and Central Asia. The floor is yours. Good morning. Thank you for coming to our presentation. And good afternoon. And tortures and killing outside of the court in the east of Ukraine, we give evidence of tortures and killing prisoners on both sides of the conflict and in the east of Ukraine. My colleagues will introduce Denis Krassimir, my colleague, Deputy Director of the program of Amnesty International in Europe and Central Asia, and Krassimir Yankov, researcher of Amnesty International. And I give the floor to Denis Krassimir. Dear colleagues and friends, thank you very much for attention to this event, to our work and to our report. And I will outline what we were able to find to collect during this study. My colleague Krassimir will give you more details and descriptions and how we did our research. I'll start from the most important, and I want that tortures and inhuman treatment, that is a military crime, war crime. Everybody who has something to do directly, like people who use this practice and those who are responsible for their actions, they should remember about this. Now, some details and information about tortures and rude treatment to prisoners. We have a lot of information about that. It's very difficult to check that, and but even in those cases we were able to document it quite enough. Those just a few. That allows her to say tortures and rude treatment and take place very often and used by both parties of the conflict. Methods are different. People are beaten and kept in unclear places, and they put their sacks on their heads and they keep them in forlorn in that state, and they hand them up to a ceiling and they use an electroshock to torture. And my colleague Krassimir will tell you about who does that. Those who use that, a lot of them. There are different groups that participate in the conflict into regular units and not regular units. And from all of them, we received information about such methods. Usually, tortures and rude treatment are done not in official places where they're kept in captivity, so somebody arrests them and they keep them somewhere, and the awful things are happening there. As a rule, after they get into official imprisonment, the place of imprisonment of SIZO, etc., usually the attitude to prisoners improves, and not always. And we'll find details that how rude treatment continued after they were placed under in official imprisonment place. And then people who went to under such a treatment, and we received first messages that was done by SBU. But the biggest number of information about rude treatment and tortures we received from representatives of irregular groups and units on both sides. And we spoke about that in the past, and we have information about Sparta Battalion, Prizrak, and we have some examples from a reporter from Ukrainian forces. Such methods are we received information. Also, they took place in our report. Many times we mentioned Duk right sector, and we have information about one from one source about how rude treatment and beatings and inhuman conditions of keeping at the base, which is used by Duk right sector. It's very difficult to check that information. It's very difficult to communicate with people who went through that. And speaking about this concrete case, we had contacts of other people who could explain something and confirm something, but despite of many efforts, With many of them, it was impossible to contact them. There could be different explanation, but the most probable is that people are just afraid to speak about that because that could lead to serious consequences. Representatives of the right sector, we spoke to them, and they confirmed something, that they have a base of the right sector in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and they keep people under guard there in the custody. And as someone who told us about that, people are arrested for 2-3 days, maximum for a week. Ours was told that people could be kept there for a week or even for months. The right sector refused that they use rude treatment, and as to our information, people are treated rudely, and they kept about 20 people in a room for 6, and with 6 beds, and details that could be very difficult to express them without emotion. We have them in our report. They're quite sad. And so, are there tortures and beatings or not? Independently, the fact of keeping people in custody in an unofficial place in the hands of people who have no right for that, and that is a direct violation of commitments of Ukraine in this field. We were trying to find out about the legal status of members of such volunteer battalions, and on which base they can arrest people and keep in custody. For those questions, we didn't receive satisfactory answers. We sent a letter to General Prosecutor, and trying to get to find out the legal status of voluntary battalions and on which base they keep people in custody. We asked to pay attention to the situation because the details we provided to them. We provided more details, and then the nature of those accusations demands checking them and investigation. We don't have information about the beginning of such investigation, and that's very sad that we didn't receive the answer from the prosecutor. Probably I will stop on this, and we'll speak about what do we ask the Ukrainian government to do, but our colleague will describe our study and also about some cases Krassimir had to face. Good afternoon. Thank you very much that you came. I will tell you about a methodology, how we collected that information, why we state what we state. The story of tortures and rude treatment with arrested are not just shocking, but they happen very often on both sides of the front. We interviewed 33 prisoners, 16 were under the arrest of Ukraine, also all except one told us about the beating and all rude treatment, especially in the first hours and days after they were arrested. More, in addition to battles, there is information war. You know about that. There are a lot of rumors about horrors on both sides of the front, and very often there is just special amount of information. In February, March, there were different stories about massive castration of Ukrainian soldiers in captivity, but those rumors were not confirmed. Also, there was a case when there was a video of burning alive of separatists by one Ukrainian battalion, which checked that information, but it was not confirmed. I just tell you, just for you to understand what kind of rumors we have to deal with. Despite all of that, communication with people who were under tortures, it's very difficult task. We have to remember about psychological trauma they went through after all of that, and every memory about that can repeat the trauma. Many people in our report they are anonymous because they want to forget about that and they want to live on. We also wanted to thank relatives of those Ukrainian soldiers who died, who contacted us, and we didn't know about some cases, but they wanted justice and they demand responsibility, and they wanted to get our assistance, and you can read about those cases in our report. Former prisoners on both sides, they described they were beaten, their bones were broken, they against used they used knives, electroshock, and they staged tortures, and they showed the x-rayed shots of broken hands and pictures of wounds and missing teeth. That proves that both sides of the conflict committed crimes, war crimes, or the prisoners that are under their control. As a result, we found at least 4 recent cases when separatists tortured live Ukrainian soldiers in their captivity. We had autopsy of Ukrainian soldiers that showed that information we had received from social networks and also from witnesses, and sometimes separatists publish that information, or people who support separatists, and also mass media reports. And I would like to tell you about one case which received media resonance, and that is a case on January 22 in Krassimir village.
There were 2 road checkpoints, a Ukrainian road checkpoint, where there was the 22nd Territorial Defense Battalion, and separatists. At around 9 a.m., the separatists attacked the Ukrainian road checkpoint, and as a result of this attack, they captured 11 soldiers. There was a video published where we saw how 11 soldiers were interrogated against a white wall, and we found some witnesses who saw those 11 soldiers and were among them. They said that after the active combat action finished, they say that 40 to 50 separatists fell upon them, and they started to threaten Ukrainian de facto prisoners of war, and some of them wanted to lynch them. There were statements like, let's shoot them at once, why have they come to our land? One of the witnesses saw on the sleeves of those separatists at least one chevron of Vostok battalion, which shows us who took part in this attack, and especially a young girl was prominent with a short haircut who had a Dragunov sniper rifle. She came to the prisoners and shot them in their legs and their lungs. Not less than 3 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in this way. One of them, Albert Sorokhonyan, an ethnic Armenian, was shot because he replied to the question, why are you here, why are you taking part in the war? He said, I wage a war for Ukraine. Maybe such fate would befall other prisoners as well, but then one of the commanders came and said, those guys are without arms, you shouldn't do this, they should be treated medically. Someone had enough brains to say so, and as a result, the witnesses who survived were taken to Donetsk, they were treated there and then exchanged in February. The more detailed information on this case and other cases of summary executions of Ukrainian soldiers in captivity you can see in our report. And now I give the floor to Denis Krivosheyev, who will tell us about our recommendations to both sides of the conflict and to international community. Our main call is to both sides to understand that torture and cruel behavior is a war crime, and everyone should be aware of this, and everyone should be punished whatever side they are on. Secondly, we would like Ukrainian leaders to say that they won't tolerate any cruel behavior, but the key demand and request, and it proceeds from the international obligations of Ukraine to investigate all the information about torture and cruel behavior in relation to people held in custody. There are two sides to this problem. As I said, there's testimony to maintain that torture and cruel behavior takes place on the part of forces subordinated to Kiev. All such information should be checked, and it should lead to criminal cases and persecution. The protection of witnesses should be provided for. It is evident that not all the people are ready to take part as witnesses for fear. There should be defense of witnesses all through the process of investigation. Also, it is necessary to keep people who are suspected of doing this from any contact with people who are in custody, and we should provide for this situation when people are not kept incommunicado. They should be immediately transferred to official bodies that have the right to keep people in custody, and all the information about people being kept in cellars or anywhere else should be investigated. The persons guilty should be established and brought to responsibility, and everyone who is part of this process should understand their own responsibility and the responsibility of the state of Ukraine. As far as the territory non-controlled by the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian obligation to investigate this is not repelled by the fact that they do not control this territory. The information that goes, information about what's going on is coming here. This information should be collected, stored, and be checked for the time, with the view of for the time when there will be an opportunity to bring those people to responsibility. We also call the other side of the conflict, the so-called DNR and LNR and the formations that they control, that to understand that they also are responsible according to the international law. And although they are not a recognized state formation, they are responsible to avert torture and cruel behavior. And people who do this should be immediately removed from the functions and positions that allow them to do so. And everybody who takes part in the conflict should get a clear-cut message that such actions are inadmissible. We also call upon Ukraine to swiftly ratify the Roman Statute and to adopt the declaration that would spread the jurisdiction of the court on the past period. We also call upon the international structures to actively display their interest in this situation, to visit both sides, both territories, to document such cases and to insist on their investigation. And now we will be ready to answer your questions, and please ask both about this report and other cases.
1+1. Tell me, please, you are allowed to I understand Russian, but I will not be Ukrainian.
So you saw the two Russian soldiers who are now in Kiev. Are there any episodes of the conversation that you could reveal? And could you please tell us about the state that those people are in? Have you been able to see whether they were beaten? What is their general state, and whether Ukraine does adhere to all international standards in keeping those people?
The invitation was BU. I could see those people and I listened to them. In the context of that invitation, of that meeting, some confirmation that they were rudely treated, we did not receive that. But I'd like to come to a broader topic of the report. That violations, the tortures and routes of treatment are used in different situations. People are tortured before they're taken officially into the custody and outside of those places. So I don't believe that as to those two Russian military men, you have to understand when there is a chance to see someone and there is no indication that there was a torture or treatment, people don't confirm anything. Not always they are ready to be sincere, not always. Secondly, not all who are in the custody or tortured or those tortures a long time ago. I apologize. I don't know whether you understood what you said. Could you say clearly? As if you say, you answer as if or as if of these. As to these two people, could you say something? We didn't see it. It is not confirmed that they were not tortured. We didn't have that. We don't have confirmation about route of treatment against these two people. Those are the questions. Is it possible to publish a video of the interview? There are two things. First, as to military men. So that is a violation of international humanitarian law, the Third Geneva Convention. War prisoners should not be humiliated and should not be publicly demonstrated or anything else. Something that can humiliate their dignity. Status of a war prisoner is not applied because Russia doesn't recognize it's a part of the conflict, and Ukraine has not an internal conflict but ATO. So they don't have that status, but the spirit of that rule, international law demands attitude to them according to treat them as war prisoner centers. So that's why, in that sense, demonstration on the video, that's a soft form, but that is a violation of international humanitarian law. Use this case, we like to ask Ukrainian authorities to give access for law advocacy groups to people who are in custody, because that practice will root out, or at least it will reduce the risk of tortures. The last part of the question. These two citizens of Russia are kept according to all international rules since the time that you visited them. So does Ukraine comply with international law? If they are fed, if there is no route of treatment against them, if there is no pressure on them, then yes. But our colleagues saw them during a certain time, and we cannot say that there is any violation. Does Ukraine have the right to keep them in custody? Yes. Any other question? Ukrinform, National Information Agency. Tell me, please, did you, in addition to General Public Prosecutor, did you speak to MOD or to SBU? as to these facts that you use in your report. Is there confirmation of police of those facts of tortures and route treatment? The copy we sent to the Ministry of Interior and also to SBU and to General Prosecution. There was no chance to discuss the content. We have regular meetings with them, and acceptance of such a practice is always a problem. So, because if you accept that there was a crime, in this case a military crime, and that requires a serious actions, and will demand that exception, but it should be based on the investigation, and it should be objective investigation. That's a problem. That's why I will allow me to refer. Last week, Parliament was very active and they passed the law on State Bureau investigation. And that's a body which potentially could play the role, a very important role. For many years, we demanded to set up an independent body of investigation that would be responsible for investigation of tortures done by police or other bodies. In the first draft law, our appeal is important. If they will have a broad jurisdiction in the context of such approach, they will not be objective as to investigation of the crimes committed by police. So once again, they should objective investigation, and maybe there could be a body which, without any functional, administrative, or personal connections with a representative from other law enforcement agencies, that could be consider tortures and route treatment in the context of the conflict in the east, and to take actions which are demanded by such situation. Channel 17, 2 questions. Probably you spoke to both sides of with this request to react to treat prisoners better. Why do you have more action? If to compare it with other international local conflicts, it's clear that this is cynical, but to which extent the situation is worrisome. Worrisome in which sense? We don't compare countries because, in our opinion, any violation of human rights in international treaties is not something to be allowed, and it doesn't matter how the quantity doesn't matter. That's why I'll not answer your question, who's better, who's worse. It would be not correct. There is a violation, and there should be clear actions. As to reaction of the parties, the same. There is one principal difference. Ukraine is a recognized state, and it has some commitments, and you have to comply with your commitments, and there are structures responsible for that. And if not, the structures, it's difficult with the other side, because international humanitarian law puts the same commitments on them as to prisoners, including we raised the issue about not selective shellings upon civilian territories. These commitments exist to demand. Practically, it's very difficult to demand them with unrecognized governments. So as to war crimes, that's a very narrow number of issues, and there should be personal responsibility for that. As history doesn't stop today, and we hope that justice will domain on both sides, and to all who were involved in such a practice.
I have 3 questions actually. If, according to your assessment, do you feel yourself in a position already to draw comparisons to other conflicts? I'm concentrating at this point on the war in the former Yugoslavia and conflicts that were regulated within the ICTY in The Hague. When I read your report, that reminds me a lot to the beginning of the Bosnian War, of cases like Prijedor and Keraterm, and I would like to ask you whether you feel yourself, after your analysis, in a position to draw comparisons there. That would be the first question, and the second would be, I read that you mentioned that you were speaking to witnesses that were facing the Ukrainian jurisdictory system, and they were refused to be treated, and I would like to know whether you could elaborate this a little bit more. There were cases, some of your witnesses that were going to the justice system, and they were refused. I would like to know if you could go a little bit deeper into that. And as a first question, if I may, I read that there are problems in terms of the prisoner exchanges also, because there's a sort of a chaos of responsibility also in the Ukrainian side. If you could elaborate this also a little bit. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you. Krassimir may be better placed to answer some of your questions. I'll try and take them and then hand over to my colleague, but just give me a chance. Okay. So, first of all, as I already answered just before, comparing to other conflicts, to other countries, is something we don't find necessarily helpful. With regards to the ICTY, the international structure that was created to deliver justice over the conflict in Yugoslavia, this conflict is nowhere near that. Then we would hope that the system, existing national system, be able to deliver justice through the mechanism it has, and no international structure should supplement the functions and the obligations that exist on the national government. So one of our recommendations, which I mentioned, is on Ukraine to investigate and prosecute people under its control, and to investigate and collate evidence on abuses committed by the other side until such time when it will be able to fully perform its functions. Where it comes to international justice, the shortest way for Ukraine to pursue this route would be to ratify the Rome Statute and recognize jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court since the moment of its creation, that is over the whole period of this conflict and in relation to all sides. And avoiding doing this, and I know there were some legal constitutional limitations, but there are ways around it which have been found, and I cannot see justification for avoiding this. Again, recognizing jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court is not a supplement to national obligation and national criminal system. But this is one route of which could offer a route for international criminal justice. And in that context, I'm not sure whether a separate tribunal would ever be created for Ukraine or in fact needed. With regards to the witnesses being failed by the existing criminal justice system, this is a problem we have been facing for years. Long before this conflict started, we have documented numerous instances of torture or alleged torture by police and other law enforcement agencies in Ukraine, and we have documented time and again the failure of the system to deliver justice to the victims and take full account of the witnesses' evidence in this regard. And the problem is very simple, and it's not typical of Ukraine, it's typical of pretty much every country. There is a resistance to have your own members of criminal justice system effectively and impartially investigated and prosecuted where evidence exists for doing so. And this is why we reiterate our call. There needs to be a separate agency which would be impartial from the rest of the criminal justice system, that will look impartially into all evidence and all allegations and identify people who may be or are responsible for this practice and deliver their prosecution. And until these people are part of the same system, that objective, that aim is not really deliverable. I believe for this reason, quite often, in this context, when people go and seek justice through the existing mechanisms, effectively they face denial of justice, because the system as it is now is not designed, it's intended to, but it's not designed to deliver justice impartially. And the latest biggest call in this regard we have made in a connection in relation to the events of Euromaidan, where major abuses were committed on a big scale. The evidence is there, the political commitment to have these abuses investigated are there, but the system as it is now is not capable of delivering that justice, and that's the core of the problem. And with regards to issues on the prisoner exchange, the report does give some information on this in the background, but it's not an issue which we are directly concerned with, because exchange of prisoners and how it's organized is beyond the immediate interest on human rights violations or respect for human rights. However, Krassimir, as someone who was involved in this research, can be a little bit more detailed on this.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Basically, neither side, right now the official exchange process has stopped, has come to a halt. Neither side, nor the Ukrainian forces, nor the separatist forces have a single body that's responsible for channeling through the information about people, about prisoners. On the Ukrainian side, there are at least 3 separate entities, one of them a volunteer entity, which is dealing with prisoner exchanges. On the separatist side, it's much more chaotic. Both sides find great trouble in actually establishing and identifying the number of people held by the other side. Here on the Ukrainian side, people are formally held by the SBU, and SBU is being very secretive about the number of people, the nature of these people, who they are, what did they do, and their numbers, how many are they. On the separatist side, it's even more chaotic than this, because you have a myriad of battalions, very few of them are under some kind of centralized command, and for example, people who have been dealing with exchanges, taking out Ukrainian soldiers from prisoner captivity, separatist captivity, they are literally going village by village and commander by commander asking, do you have anyone? Who is this? Or they're combing through these loads of social media information of people, just pictures of prisoners, and so on. This being said, it's important to note that exchanges do take place, but they take place in very small scale. Sometimes it's just a couple of people, it's just a personal arrangement between volunteers on the Ukrainian side and battalion commanders on that side. Sometimes it's arrangements, for example, both sides have veterans from the Afghanistan war, which are on both sides of the conflict right now, and they have some kind of, I would call it soldier's honor or officer honor, and they use that to exchange prisoners. Sometimes Ukrainian soldiers are exchanged for bodies of separatists, sometimes for food. So the process is really chaotic at the moment, and there is no single explanation on how this can go further. Yeah, thank you.
Крайнє запитання на сьогодні.
Андрій Куликов, Громадське радіо.
Andrei Kulikov, Громадське радіо. What is your cooperation with Ukrainian advocacy groups, and what's their attitude to this problem? And also, what did you do to deliver your opinion about the need to recognize these facts and to deliver that information to top leadership? How based as to crimes of Russian military men. As to cooperation with Ukrainian colleagues, we are trying to cooperate the way we can, but there are some limits. We have in Kyiv there's international secret staff does that. We stand for independence of our research and conclusions. In this sense, we're always happy to get information about violations from Ukrainian law advocacy groups and from Russian. Also, we check that information. We don't bring others to our research for us to be able to be responsible for our conclusions. We had some such meetings, and with Krassimir we had a meeting with colleagues, and we asked them to identify concrete cases, concrete people with whom we could start communication, and through them to get information about who returned, who passed through tortures, and how to. It's a difficult process, but in this key for starting point, we had. It was important for us to have contacts with Ukrainian advocacy groups. As to delivering our position to the top of Ukrainian leadership, it's difficult. The top meetings take place, and in Ukraine, 2 September last year, General Secretary of the highest top official from Amnesty International, he wanted to have a meeting with the Prime Minister and the President, and there was a meeting with Yatsenyuk, and that was, if you remember, we published a report about violation of human rights by Aidar battalion, and that information was delivered to Ukrainian leadership in the top level. And probably we were one of the first who publicly stated about the situation, and we published some facts, and that this topic became more open, and just maybe because of such a meeting. It's clear that top level meetings, it's very difficult to organize them. They don't happen often. We use all possible means to deliver our information and demands as high as possible during regular communication, also through media, through colleagues. As to tortures by Russian military men, to confirm participation of Russian military from regular units as a part of not people on vacations or former military is very difficult, and it's not our task. That's why to say that we had got such information, and that confirms that. In fact, I cannot. But the fact that somebody from that side tortures, and they are known as members of battalions, and we have, it's very difficult to check. We check what we can report, we report. But to say that in this case there were such actions by Russian military, and we cannot say just because it doesn't mean that it doesn't take place. We just don't have that information. From 1+1. If to speak about proofs of tortures by right sector, for which period did we have that information? Evidence of which, about which period? It's now, last year, winter, summer. Could you, how close it is to the present day? Information as to tortures by members of the Duka right sector, we received it from different sources many times. Sometimes people, maybe somebody is using the brand of right sector because all who got into the captivity was taken into custody. They said there were people from the right sector, which maybe is true, maybe not. As to the base of the right sector and pioneers camp and that source we refer to in details, that information is for a long period from September to the end of the year, maybe until the beginning of this year. We didn't give all that is because that person spoke to us on the condition of anonymity, and he had reasons that he could be identified and that could be confidence. But information that took place and for a long period, we have that, and information should be seriously checked and investigated. That base, as I know, it is still used by the right sector. Again, coming out of my conversation with their representatives, and they keep people under custody. I underline, as I understand, Ukrainian, according to Ukrainian laws, they don't have the right for that. And if somebody convinces me in something different, what should be there? That should be investigated. The period, I assume that if there is the base, is used now because that practice is illegal and that there is a risk, and the people in such battles, they don't have the right to keep people in custody. One more. Who from Ukrainian authorities you sent that report? Head of this BU, General Prosecutor, did you receive any answer in our report? I hope that everyone has that report. We appealed it. We have a general letter to the government and to some agencies, and mostly we sent requests to SBU, to Ministry of Interior, to the prosecution, to MOD, to the Parliament, to the Ombudsman, and to international structures, and to the second part of the conflict. You have not received an answer from anyone. The report just was issued. We tried to. It's such a short time. Once again, to the General Prosecutor, we sent that report in advance, so they had enough of time to respond, and I'm sad, disappointed they don't have, they cannot answer